Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor, and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. AJ has over 30 years experience specializing in recovery from BPD relationship breakups and offers expert knowledge, in-depth understanding delivered with compassion and empathy. To purchase and book sessions, please visit ajmahari.ca. Welcome to the show. Here's your host, AJ Mahari.
What is the final discard in the relationship with somebody with borderline personality disorder? And how do you know if you've been split and devalued to the final discard or not? When I work with clients, I help them, and I can help you to avoid having to go through all that pain and all the limbo recycling, endless rumination, agony of is it on, is it off, is it the final discard, isn't it? I can help you to circumvent that entire process if you're willing to just take that first step to book a session with me and start talking about what is the real solution to having a BPD relationship breakup end. Because it's going to fall on you one way or another, sooner or later. And let me add that whether you're in limbo, recycling, is it the final discard, isn't it, or not, these relationships with the unhealthy bonds, there is no love to be found. That's something you have to work on accepting no matter where you are in cycles with a person with BPD. It's going to come down to you. Working with, if I resonate with you, me, or whomever you would choose to work with, who's an expert in this area, it's going to come down to you making the BPD, quote, final discard, unquote, final. And what do I mean by that? Well, please do listen to the rest of this episode. Are you left feeling right now like you have so much more love to give? Because I kind of doubt it. You're probably in agony and you're probably exhausted. And are you giving anything of your self-love to the borderline? Were you ever in this process? No, because people with codependency don't even know self-love. You're getting depleted. You're in the limbo place. Is it the final discard? How will you know? How do these relationships really finally end when you don't know if it's a final discard or not, or do you? How can you? And so, depending on the pattern of the revolving door of the recycling of the on-off relationship, quote, called BPD breakup, unquote, that never really gets done, it's all very complicated. There's a way that you don't have to stay in this limbo. And you can work with someone like myself if I resonate with you, and you can put a stop to this limbo. And put a stop to the disempowerment you're experiencing and the way you're being hollowed out by waiting to see what the borderline's going to do next. You've been ghosted, you've been discarded, you've been hoovered, you've been ghosted, discarded, hoovered. Well, there is a way to end this, but it's not by focusing on or waiting for the borderline to get there. Do they ever end? Is it ever a final discard? Can you know that? Does the borderline know that? This is really complicated, because people will tell you that there are signs, or when you get split to devaluation, and unlike maybe other times you might have been ghosted, that there can come this final discard, and you might not see it or recognize it, or are there signs of it across all people with BPD that do this? Not really. And can you always see it coming? No, you can't. So when you are split to devaluation that leads to ghosting, or more so to a discard than even ghosting, because is ghosting permanent? Or ghosting seems pretty temporary with a lot of people with borderline personality disorder. So the thing is, often when you have been split to devaluation and it might have finality for the person with BPD or a narcissist, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. Now, For some people, this happens because it happens over and over, repeatedly. Do they ever get to a final discard, you might ask? Well, some of them don't, and many of them do. But how does that even happen? Becomes really complex to explain because with so many people with BPD, they're all individuals. They have common core patterns of what's happening and what they do in these relationships to people with codependency, what they do to their partners, that they will ghost and they will discard. And sometimes there's the more needy, clingy people with BPD that people have to actually break up with them. But the point here is what you really have to take into consideration, I would suggest and advocate for you to do. That when you are ghosted or discarded, and then what happens for you, the agony, the pain, the rumination, the cognitive dissonance, and more, is that's when you really need to get started working with someone on what's happening for you. So you've been in a relationship with somebody you suspect or you know that has BPD or NPD, or you suspect maybe potentially they have what BPD, NPD comorbidity really is about. And the thing is, you're not necessarily going to be able to know whether you have been discarded for the final time or the ghost is a discard or not. Whether you are encountering or you have already experienced the final discard or a ghosting that is going to they're not coming back to hoover again, to try again, to recycle again, or not, you're not necessarily going to know that. And so when you're going through waiting for a hoover, hoping for a hoover, or there's been a pattern of, discard, hoover, discard, hoover, ghost, hoover, ghost, hoover, because ghosting isn't exactly like discarding. And yet really, how can we tell the difference with some people with BPD between the ghosting or the discarding? Because sometimes for some people with BPD, discarding really is ghosting. And what's the difference I'm trying to delineate here? Ghosting has more predictability for hoover. So ghost, hoover, ghost, hoover, or ghost, and then you reverse hoover and you get replies back and it starts over again. The recycling, the revolving door type on-off situationships. So delineate between when you're ghosted. Is that a discard? Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And so is there such a thing? There is such a thing as a ghosting that's going to be a discard. After maybe ghosting, many times of ghosting, being ghosted that wasn't final or a discard, the finality of a discard. But then not all discards have finality. See, people with BPD, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know why they're feeling what they're feeling, and they project it all out onto the closest person, so the partner or a favorite person, etc. And then when these things happen too often, they're triggered to the emotional dysregulation, etc. too often, and there's a split cycle, and then, maybe they come back to base mood, but you're not really getting re-idealized. Who knows? The borderline doesn't even know. It's just, they're not even thinking about when they impulsively, often, no matter when and how long it takes them to get to ghosting you or discarding you, but splitting you to devaluation that leads to this break, maybe a break like you haven't experienced before in the cycles of their not really re-idealizing, but going back to base mood. So a little bit more available to kind of relate to some degree or other. And then, triggered again, split to devaluation. Now what? Doesn't always lead to ghosting. Doesn't always lead. There's cycles with people with BPD, their own individual cycles. So this is important to consider too. So is there really anything called a final discard? I would say yes and no. Yes, because some people with BPD will keep moving forward in their own blind, unconsciously, not aware way of how they just dumped you. They threw you aside. Yes, they can do that. You can be out of sight, out of mind, period, end of story. But you're sitting on the other side of that not knowing, is it period, end of story for the borderline or the narcissist or not. Bottom line is, for some people with BPD, there may never be, or not for years, a final discard or a ghosting, you've been ghosted that has within it all the sort of signs, or, the relationship, quote, breaks up, it's off, you're not hearing from them. They block you or they don't block you, or you try to help yourself out and you block them. But there's always some area of, or avenue or venue of communication that will pop up if it's going to, or you reverse Hoover. The thing is, all these people with BPD or NPD are individuals, and they all do things just a little bit in their own ways, even within the patterned ways, and much of it can look the same. So I would suggest to you that if you get ghosted, you've been ghosted, they've slammed that door in your face, and you're not over it by a long shot, and you want to get them back, and you're hurting like crazy, like just horribly, and there's that longing, and then there's the issues of codependency that are coming up for you. Like, you can't let go. You love this person. What's going on? How could they do this to me? Because I've given them everything, and all of a sudden none of that matters, and they've so hurt me, and I have to at least talk to them to let them know how they've hurt me. And you're really in a lot of emotional wounded difficulty, and they've done a lot of that to you. And then there's what you're already carrying because you have codependency. I really want to say strongly that, the cycles in these relationships are definitely, in the beginning, idealization, which I'll have more coming on. What that really, really doesn't mean that people think it does. But people with BPD in the beginning, they're mirroring you. They're people-pleasing you out of their own codependency. It feels great, all of that, right? That's why you can't let go. Because you can't let go of the good feelings. And there's many other things that people with codependency are going through. Like, I'll never find anybody like this again. Well, you gotta hope. But when you feel like you still want them back, that feels devastating, right? And then you're like, I'm never gonna know this kind of, quote, love again, unquote. Here's where you need to get into a healing recovery process, because you don't really want to know that kind of love again. But right now you don't know that because it felt so good. You're still enamored with it and in denial about what's really happening once you've been ghosted or discarded. The pattern in these relationships, essentially, among other patterns, is the borderline or the narcissist. But borderlines do this even more. On and off, back and forth, chameleon, because they're all over the place emotionally. So they're going to ghost you, hoover you, ghost you, hoover you, ghost, discard, hoover, ghost, discard, hoover, but one day that just might stop. And one day it likely will stop, but there can be many iterations of it not stopping. So you don't get to the final discard from the borderline, or even a final ghosting, or how does that ghosting turn into that discard, the final discard. Often for many people with BPD, it might not ever. That doesn't mean they're always going to recontact you, though. But it's very complicated. There's many levels into what is motivating people with BPD and why they're doing what they're doing, that to you is this ghost hoover, or discard hoover, back and forth, back, on, off, on, off, on, off. Oh, today I love you. I don't anymore. I never did love you. From the borderline. I would argue that in many, many situations with many, many people with BPD in particular, there might not be a final discard, but I don't say that to give you hope. I say that to stress that it's going to be in your best interest to let that first ghosting, or ghost to discard, or if it's gone on longer so it feels more like, okay, I was discarded, get into a healing recovery journey right then and there. Because even if you're going to recycle back, even if they're going to hoover, or you reverse hoover successfully, which isn't being so successful in long term, you're going to get hurt more. But if you get into a healing recovery journey, at least the way that I work with clients, I help clients through these journeys and healing and recovery, and sometimes, often, they go back and recycle. And the challenge there then is to keep working, coming to your sessions and talking about whatever's going on, and talking about, but to not lose sight of, even when it feels great again, if you get the hoover, or you thought it was a final discard and now you've got a hoover, or you're back in contact with them, and let's say you've started sessions and you're like, well, I don't need them anymore. It's not true. This is something I like people to think about, because starting sessions, at least the way that I work with people, so I'm speaking about the services that I offer, if you resonate with me, if you want to start sessions when you're first ghosted or discarded, the on and off of the first, quote, breakup, unquote, and maybe it's not going to be the end, and you're going to get back, and maybe some things are going to feel good for a little while, but it's going to be a cycle that isn't going to stop. And that's what people with codependency kind of suspend, disbelief or belief about, and kind of get into denial about. Well, we're back together again. This is time it's going to work, because I'm going to change this, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say this, and I'm not going to say that, and I'm going to flow with these cycles of whatever the borderline's doing. But it doesn't really work out ever to be that simple, that predictable, that controllable. And so I would argue that present to you for you to think about. There are final discards, but it's really hard to know when is a discard a final discard. When is a ghosting leading to really the discard of finality of, that's it. They're done with you. Because even when they monkey branch, even when they cheat, even when they go to the next person really quickly, if they didn't monkey branch or cheat, then it's like you're devastated by that, because you don't feel like you can do that at all, which it's healthy that you can't, by the way. And if you try to, you're going to run into the next cluster B, get rewounded all over again, but you won't be done with the other one yet, because you have to heal that. You have to work that through to process the grief, etc., the pain, to be able to let that person go, which is really hard for people with codependency who've been in these unhealthy bonds with any borderline. So here's the thing. This is probably sounding clear as mud, but I'm advocating that people, once you are ghosted or you think you're discarded, or is this the final discard, because now you haven't heard from them for way beyond a pattern of previous ghosting or discarding, and so I'm out here to work with you. If I resonate with you, I would suggest that perhaps you book some sessions with me now. Let's start talking about what you've been through, what's going on, what's your understanding. Let's start trying to help you to understand more what you're feeling and why, what you're experiencing and why, so you can start to understand more how you can help yourself out. And even if you do recycle or you do hear from them, you get another Hoover, I still work with people through those situations, and we may slow down the sessions while you're all happy again for a little while, right? But then that's going to be short-lived. And so then I have clients that sometimes we're working, and then they go and they recycle, they get a Hoover, they tell me about it, and many people are telling me, and we're working on it because they don't want to go back, and they're fighting against it, and some people are successful, and some people go back, and I'm not the arbiter of this if I'm working with you, when I'm working with clients I'm working with. But here's the thing, so some people, they will say, well, I don't want to work on anything right now, I don't need those sessions right now, if you purchased, a few, and you haven't used them yet. But here's the thing I want to tell people, then you just let them sit there, because you're going to go around inevitably ghosted and discarded again, which is not on your mind in that moment if you're going to re-engage the relationship again, if you get the opportunity. So I would advocate strongly that you can't really know unless you're ready to start getting in your own healing and recovery process to be able to work at your side of this unhealthy bond, and why you can't let go, and why you want them back, and how they might come back or they might not come back from the quote ghosting or quote final discard or not, so that you can start to work at it from your side, so that you can do it in your own time and way to close that door, so that you're not constantly in this recycling cycle that is really increasing your pain exponentially every single time. And then the rumination, and if you have limerence, and the obsessive nature of you've been ghosted, or you think discarded, and you think it's the final discard, but you're not sure. And the way that people with codependency sit with that and obsess with that and ruminate about that and have the cognitive dissonance, and some people can't even function or focus on anything else, or if people do after a while, maybe it's been 6 months or a year even, and you haven't heard back from that BPDX, But you want to, but it's not good for you to want to, but you do want to. And or you're trying to work your way through not wanting to. And getting to a place where you can get no contact and hold no contact. But all of this, you're best off working with someone. I'm out here to work with you in all of these iterations of stages of the process of all of these things that are going on in a, quote, breakup, unquote, that really isn't, like I said in another episode, isn't really a breakup just yet. What is it? We don't know. You don't know. You're not sure. It could be on again. It might not. So what does final discard really mean? I think some people are going to sit in this really horribly painful, obsessing, ruminating, barely functioning in your life place of just indescribable agony and etc. for a long time. Some people sit there for months. Some people sit in that position for a year. Some people for more than a couple of years. And sometimes you might get that hoover or recontact, but it might not be a re-engaging one. They might be just hoovering you to see if you still answer, and then they blow you off again. So are you sitting right now in a position of having experienced a final discard from a borderline or not? How can you know? How long has it been? Does enough time go by mean that it is a final discard? In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. What is that period of time so you can know it's a final discard? For some borderlines, it's 2 days. They're gone. It's when they do it, they're gone. For many others, it's 2 weeks, 2 months, a year, maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half, maybe it's 2 years. Literally, it could be more than 3 years and on. And so you're going to be in a world of hurt. And how can you sit in a world of hurt for 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years plus? Because it's not really whether or not the borderline ghosting or many episodes of that, is it now final? Is it a final discard? Have I been ghosted, discarded with finality? That's it, it's over, they're never coming back. You're not really going to know that. And a lot of time is going to pass, potentially, because maybe it is a final discard as far as the borderline is absolutely concerned now. But you can't know that because maybe they've done this to you multiple times. How could you know which one is the final one? Then you might first get a hint, right? Or a sign. When maybe if they always got back to you within, say, 6 months of a discard, ghosting to discard, that maybe it's been 6 months is the longest you've never heard from them. For some people, it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. But whatever that increment is that they usually do hoover you back after. Oh, all of a sudden they're not, and you notice that date goes by. And then another month goes by, and another month goes by. And let's say their cycle was they would ghost, discard, hoover within a couple weeks, few weeks, month, 2 months. And they go beyond that, and they go way beyond that, or 6 months, or a year, or you don't recognize a pattern to this because it's only happened to you once, and you're like, I don't know. Well, the thing is, you're going to sit there and suffer, and your life and your goals and your physical health as well as your mental health is going to deteriorate, and your quality of life is going to deteriorate. So what I recommend is people getting into working with someone like myself earlier, even when you don't know what's going on, and also how important and vital it will be for you to get into a healing recovery process. And I'm just talking about the services I offer and the way that I work with clients as soon as this happens, because I can help you to start working your way through it so that you might be able to. And many people are, after experiencing this several times, or believing now they have had the last ghosting and it's the final discard, then people definitely are panicked and in a lot of pain and want to work with, often me, not always, there's people working with all kinds of people. And then clients come and say, well, this just happened and I don't know, and are they gonna hoover me again, or I can't, and I've been blocked, and should I block them? And I don't know that I can block them because, and it's that longing feeling of wanting them back that seriously isn't as much about them as you might think it is. It's really, that's why you need to work with somebody. I can explain this to you if I resonate with you and you would like to work with me. I can help you through so much of this so that you can progress to getting to where it takes a long time to change and heal from the feelings. I shouldn't say a long time, but it takes longer. But that you can hold your feelings and maybe still feel like you want them back if they were to come back, but that you can also get to understanding why you can't do this anymore. And when you feel that, and when you know that, I still have clients, even they'll go, I can't stand it anymore. I can't do it again. I don't care. But they still can't get to going no contact, blocking the borderline entirely. Okay. And then they get a Hoover. And then I have clients where they're going to jump to the Hoover because it's where they're at. And I'll have clients that are going to call me, well, not call me, email me and go, I need a session faster, sooner, please, because I just did this, or I got hoovered and I don't know what to do and I don't know if I can hold my boundaries. And so it's all these iterations. And the best time to start working on it is while it's still happening and you're still going through all of this. And I've had clients recently and over time, right, that, we've done a lot of work in sessions and they're really making progress and they're starting to feel much better. And then something comes up in their life, various different situations, and they might not get a Hoover from the BPDX, but maybe there's a situation where they just want to contact the BPDX and maybe they're contactable, right? And so they contact them. And then they have something in mind and maybe they want to have a conversation or maybe it's something else. And I can't give you any examples because these would be the examples clients have shared with me in confidentiality. But maybe you have some experience with this yourself. Maybe you can think of a few examples. And then, so it's not that the person wants to get back in the relationship, but they're maybe not 100% sure they don't want to, but they're pretty sure they've had enough and they can't stand it anymore. But then, so for examples and reasons I'm sorry I can't give you, they contacted BPDX because they want something limited. It's like I can't. I'm sorry. It sounds vague and mysterious. Then, so whatever the contacting the ex is about for some clients that I've been working with and have worked with over the years, this has happened at different times, over time with different clients. So they really have in mind a goal, and there's a reason for the contact, and what that can be in many different things. And because it could even be like going to a funeral of somebody that the borderline cares about, that you care about, that for example, I'll just give that example. And then it's like, so you want to be able to get along on that day. And so there's really it's not that the codependent is really wanting to start the relationship again, at least not consciously, right? And then, so let's just say in this example, it is about someone's funeral and that the borderline, they're not all like this, but some might be, that they say, okay, yeah, I really want to go with you to that person's funeral. Most borderlines run the other way from funerals, by the way, but I'm just trying to give you an example. So let's say a person with BPD, a codependent has contacted their ex with BPD, and this ex with BPD, it's unlikely, by the way, but does want to go to that funeral. Okay, so you go to the funeral together, and maybe you stop for coffee before, and then you're going together, and people with BPD, boundaries, no, not really. Codependents, some boundaries maybe, yes, but are they still pliable? Often for too long, yes. And so then you go to the funeral, and then maybe if you're a guy and it's a borderline woman, she starts flirting with you, or vice versa. Or in any iteration of any type of relationship, right? Orientation, etc., or heterosexuality. And the borderline starts flirting with you, or you start flirting, and it's being received. So then what happens next is, often the person with BPD, but people with codependency jump into this too, for different reasons. All of a sudden, it's like, it's full on again. Or maybe the borderline pushes that, and you're not ready, and you're not sure, and you're thinking about it. You're like, I need a little time to think about this. I've had clients mention that they've said to people with BPD after these kind of coming back together for some reason that isn't really about trying to get them back consciously, that, well, we just, the borderline started pushing me, wanting to be back, and I'm like, whoa, I have to think about this, and they'll bring it to sessions, and we'll talk about it, and then they'll be like, well, but I think we need to give this like a month break, or at least take 2 months break, because we need to see what's... And let me just tell you, these breaks of a month or 2 or 6 or a year or 2 years, a person with BPD is not going to change enough to make a relationship work within those times either. This is codependent denial. This is you getting yourself back into a world of hurt when really maybe you've been working, like I have clients that are getting themselves back into the world of hurt after having done a lot of work. And then when they come back after they've sort of gone around again, maybe really quickly, maybe in a couple months or whatever, when they come back to working with me, when I get those inevitable emails that I know I will from certain clients, and they say, because sometimes they don't tell me why I'm not hearing from them anymore, but I know, and or they will tell me, but then I get that inevitable email, and sometimes people say, "You're not going to believe this," and I'm like, "Oh, but I do," because I have a lot of experience with this, and I don't judge anyone. And so then they'll email, but I need to come. Either if they didn't have sessions left, they'll purchase more and start again, or if they had sessions left, you can always come back and use them up after this thing, because it's not going to work out. I'm sorry to say. Then clients will contact me back, or maybe they're still talking to me in sessions, or there's been a brief break, or they didn't schedule a session for a couple weeks or a couple months. And they'll email back and they'll say, well, I did something stupid, or you're not going to believe what happened, or I got something I really need to talk to you about as soon as possible, please. And many other iterations of things they could say. And I'm like, I know already what's happening. You know what I'm saying? Like, because of experience and these patterns. So is there such a thing? So you might want to consider what I just said there. And if you're really hurting and you're ruminating and you don't know what's going on, and there's no way to really know if it's the final discard, barring a few different kind of circumstances that could happen. But there's often no way to know if it's the final discard until enough time goes by that becomes apparent. And even then, people with codependency, ruminating, cognitive dissonance, still not resolving any of this, not healing or getting through this process to let go of the ex, to empower yourself to let go and open to your own healing and moving forward. There's no way to really know if it's a final discard. And with some people with BPD, there may not ever really be a final discard. And with many there is, and you don't know that you're sitting in that space of having been discarded with finality, and they're not going to contact you ever again, and they'll block you, and they will not answer if you try to reverse Hoover them. So this idea that being ghosted is permanent, because ghost, Hoover, discard, Hoover, patterns in many of these relationships, right, with people with BPD, well, you just never know. But the thing is, you can't stop your life and sit in a suffering place where people lose themselves and sometimes their lives to this place, especially when it's like more than 2 weeks, more than 2 months, more than 6 months, more than 10 months, more than a year, maybe a year and a half. Now maybe you're into a 2-year period, because people with codependency have this false hope. And this false hope is a whole other thing unto itself that you need to heal and understand better. And the denial, and then the desire and the want, because you can't get out of the rumination, the cognitive dissonance, and you can't break that unhealthy bond. So this is complex, complicated grief, by the way, that isn't actually at a grief stage point often for people, because every time you think you've moved a quarter of an inch and you feel a bit better, and maybe you're ruminating less, then all of a sudden you think about them, or you think about a good time, and you're right back at square one with how you feel. So it's a very tricky kind of maze place to be, that's so unpredictable how you're going to feel, what you're going to want, how you're going to ever let this go, so that you're not ruminating, you're not still having cognitive dissonance, you're not still in that place of vulnerability to go back and get re-hurt, re-wounded, more hurt, and then spit out the other end again. Is there such thing as a final discard by people with BPD? Yes. But are there many with BPD that may never get to a final discard? Or at least not until you slam the door shut from your side and you block them every which way to Sunday, and you are gaining in your healing and recovery journey, as I've worked with many clients who've done this, like too many to count. Then you move on in your life and you do not care anymore. And it is a process, and grief is part of that process. So I just want to say, yes, there's such a thing as a BPD final discard, But then there's all this limbo with that you might not know if it's a final discard. Please don't sit in the limbo of, I'm waiting to see if it's a final discard for 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Yes, there are people in situations where this is going on for multiple years of their lives. And when you haven't heard that long, all those increments of time, it's best to think of it as a final discard. Does it mean absolutely it is? No, it still doesn't. But the longer it goes, the more likely it's a final discard. But I still couldn't tell you 100% if it's a final discard, unless you have some other mitigating circumstances of what occurred. But you see, so what I'm really trying to say to you, if you are codependent and you're in this limbo place, and or you think you're about to be ghosted or discarded, the breakup is coming, and wherever you're at with this, but it's a limbo place probably, and you want this to end, and you want to heal and recover, but what's your but? There's lots of different buts there for people. You are in a world of hurt. Please reach out. And if I resonate with you, please reach out to me. And if it's not me, reach out to whoever it would be for you. But be careful that they have expertise. And by the way, not only if they're a coach, because I'm like a coach, and now I'm also calling myself a breakup coach, because this is what you need, and this is what we need to help you do. But if you're not on that page yet, I won't force that at you. And you can go to Credentialed Up the Yin Yang, and I'm not going to discuss that here because I'm presenting myself as a counselor and a coach. And what does that mean? And it's mostly coaching, because when it's outside the province of Ontario, it can't be called anything else anyway. What does that mean? Well, the thing is, I'm not only an expert in this area and a trauma recovery expert, but I have the lived experience of what you're going through right now. I've been through it too. I have had a BPD, NPD, alcoholic ex. I went through that process. I had codependency at the time. I got sort of like all, groomed into it and everything, and it felt good. And even though I saw that through that a little more quickly than a lot of people will, I definitely, in my codependent denial and in what was the unconscious piece that hooked me into that relationship. Because you see, for people with codependency, you got to keep remembering, you have unconscious woundedness from childhood. It is your codependency, why you get hooked in the first place. And people usually don't know what that is until they get into a healing and recovery process. So is there a final discard? The answer, unfortunately, is yes, but maybe no. Yes, in some cases, absolutely, and after certain periods and points of time, but maybe not entirely. So you need now to think seriously about taking an action step to get into a healing recovery process. And I've described a bit about how I work with clients and how that works, if I resonate with you, so that you can start to work on your own understanding, healing, and recovering. Because ultimately, in a lot of these BPD, quote, breakups, unquote, that aren't ever like the end, whether or not it's a final discard, you're going to have to deal with it at some point or other. And it's best to get out ahead of that and to be learning coping mechanisms and understanding more and delving into what happened to you in your childhood and putting those pieces together, but delving into more coping mechanisms so that you can reduce the rumination, so that you can work through the cognitive dissonance. And you might start this process fully well not sure yet if you've had the final discard or you want that ex back still, because feelings lead people with codependency after the BPD relationship, quote, breakup, unquote. It doesn't really kind of end there a lot of the times. And does it end at the final discard, and how do you know when that is? There's so much that you can be learning, implementing strategy around to help yourself to not end up with so much increased pain of rumination, cognitive dissonance, and a lot of the things that people end up doing in patterned ways that just continues to increase your suffering. And it decreases your functioning in life. It stops you from chasing your goals and dreams. It causes people a lot of situational depression, anxiety, social anxiety, negative core beliefs coming to the forefront, and just a really egregious inner critic that will just, you'll be pummeling yourself with these interjected messages of your childhood and or from the person with BPD that, you're just never going to find anybody else and there'll never be anybody like that again, etc. So it's really important that you realize there's things you can do right now, no matter what you feel, no matter what you might think your feelings are going to lead you back to. Because if it is the final discard now, or you've already experienced it, or coming up soon, what are you going to do then? Wouldn't it be best to already be working in a process of healing recovery, process of learning how to strategize, and understanding more about why you ruminate, what's driving the cognitive dissonance, and starting to work on breaking that unhealthy bond, because it doesn't literally have to mean that you're totally in this place where you're done, but it can still really help people to decrease their pain and suffering right now, going forward, right? No matter what ends up happening, if the discard isn't final, or you still feel like you need to, follow your feelings back to another recycle, and unfortunately that gets people's feelings hurt a lot more. And then we can look at what is the codependent denial, what are the false hopes, what are the cognitive distorted beliefs and the negative core beliefs underneath those false hopes, and how does that tie into healing the wounded inner child, because the wounded inner child healing will take away a lot of these things that you're thinking about, feeling, ruminating on all about the VPD or the NPD for that matter, X, because it's not all about them the way that it feels like it is right now for you. It goes much more deeply than that. So, have you been discarded finally? Is the BPD relationship breakup actually at the breakup endpoint or not? Are you in limbo? Do you even know? Why not take an action step to get yourself into a process of starting to be able to cope better at the very least, that can lead to healing and recovery? Because sooner or later, please hear this, you are going to end up as a codependent, as an ex of somebody with BPD or NPD, or even an adult child of a borderline or narcissistic parent or mother or father. You're going to end up having to do this work, this healing recovery work, so that you can learn more about yourself in the healing of codependency, individuate and become an independent human being. You can heal that wounded inner child so that you can go forward in your life. Because without these healing recovery processes with and journeys with someone like myself, or if you resonate with me, or other people that are experts, but hey, be careful, because not everybody out there that says they're an expert is one. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, as I'm always saying. But the bottom line is, you really do need to think about this, because often that final discard, it's going to come upon you maybe sometime, but you're not going to know. And if you're still in those habituated repetition compulsion cycles, patterns of codependency, you're going to be in a world of hurt for a long time, because the unhealthy bond must be broken. And even if somebody does that, it doesn't mean that you couldn't go back still. But at least you can do it in a much different way, and I don't advocate for that at all. Is there a final discard from people with borderline personality disorder? Well, I have to say it again. Yes and no. Or seemingly yes and maybe not quite. So this really puts the ball back in your court. And then how are you going to differentiate between what might be happening in your intellect? Oh, I can't stand this anymore. I can't do this again. They're like, this is wrecking me. Lost to myself. And the emotional landscape, the heart that says, but I still love him or I still love her. And you actually don't. But that's what it feels like. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it gives you a lot of food for thought. And I hope you might take my suggestion. Get into a healing and recovery journey now. Get into a process of coping better, at the very least, with the limbo place, the cognitive dissonance, the rumination that leads so many people into trying to escape that in a lot of really unhealthy ways. And for some people, it becomes too much and they just don't survive this BPD relationship, quote, breakup, unquote, that's not quite, but and the limbo. And is this the final discard or ghosting discard, or are they going to hoover again? And it's really not a way to live. And you're abandoning yourself, because people with codependency don't have self-love. People with codependency have an unhealthy relationship to and with self. Been wounded in childhood. The cluster B comes along, and now you're all focused on the cluster B, which is going to be something from your childhood, your family of origin as well, where you've been rewounded, but you're not going to necessarily be aware of that. So please, don't sit in the limbo place of wondering, oh, do I still have another chance with this borderline? Oh, can we do this over? With the codependent denial and the really almost like malignant hope that is not healthy, that, oh, it'll work this time, which isn't based on any facts really more often than not, and it's not logical. So if you start to work with someone now, at least the way that I work with clients, you can start to look at and understand more that will help you maybe to be able to do something that's really in your best interest and not wait for what the borderline's going to do or not. And you can start to decrease your suffering in the beginning stages of this healing and recovery process, or learning to cope more effectively with the fact that you still don't really know what you want, but that now you might not have any control over that. And really, in essence, from day one when you got with a borderline or a narcissist, unbeknownst to you, you never really had control over any of it anyway.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. Our passion is to bring expert information for people that are hurt by someone with BPD. We truly hope you've gotten something from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.